Welcome to Clear Coding. I'm your host, Stephen Cleary. Today we're going to cover async gotcha number 2, and this is async void. If you've been using async in C# for any real amount of time, you've probably heard the guideline, avoid async void. It doesn't necessarily say don't ever use async void, but it says avoid async void. So why is the guideline avoid async void? Why is async void a gotcha? And the reason is that void is actually not a natural return type for asynchronous methods. Normally an asynchronous method returns a task-like. It's either a task or a value task most of the time. And this task represents the asynchronous method's execution. So when the method completes, the task completes. If the method returns a value, that value is placed on the task. If the method throws an exception, then that exception is captured and placed on the task. So in many ways, that task is a representation of the execution of that method. The problem with void is that it doesn't represent anything. There's literally no value. So there's no way to detect when the method completes. There's no way to get the results out of the method. There's no way to catch an exception outside of that method. It's not possible to place an async void method in a try catch because it's returning void. There's literally no concept of execution here. So it's like the calling code calls this method that then just does something completely outside of the execution scope of your program. That's kind of one way to think about it. Another aspect of async void is that it doesn't actually exist in other languages that have adopted async and await. And I think that tells us something. So C# and Visual Basic were the first languages to adopt async and await, and then many other languages took that idea, including JavaScript and Python and many other very popular languages of today. Many of them have taken async and await, the keywords, and placed them in their own languages in their own way. And what's interesting is that none of these languages have an equivalent of async void, because it's a very unnatural return type. Really, it was designed only for asynchronous event handlers. That was the original purpose behind async void, and today that's most of the places where it's used is as asynchronous event handlers. It's occasionally useful elsewhere, like if you have a top-level processing loop or something like in a pipeline, but you have to be really careful with those. You have to wrap the whole body of the method in a try-catch and have some kind of exception handling and some way of notifying that something is complete. So if you're in a pipeline, sometimes that completion notification comes in as you're completing that channel or you're completing that data flow block with the final result or that exception. And that's the way that you detect that those kind of methods complete. So async void is occasionally useful in those kind of scenarios. So it's best to avoid async void unless you are actually writing an event handler or one of those like top-level processing loop in a pipeline. So what's the proper thing to do instead? Well, it works much better if you actually transform the async void method into a task returning method, and then you can await it. And now that you're awaiting it, your code knows when it completes. Your code can observe any exceptions from that async void method. And also, if your async void method used to be doing side effects as a result, consider making those part of a return value that you're actually returning from that method. You'll find that your code cleans up a little bit better. If you do have any questions, please comment below. Thank you for watching, and until next time, enjoy coding.